Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that is profoundly important and honestly, deeply misunderstood. We're talking about eating disorders. My goal here is to give you a clear, science-backed, and empathetic look at what these conditions really are. We're going to completely bypass the media stereotypes and get straight to the facts, the root causes, and most importantly, the pathways to recovery. So let's jump right in. I want to start with a number that really puts things into perspective. 52. Here in the US, an eating disorder causes one death every 52 minutes. That's over 10,000 deaths every single year. So we're not just talking about someone having a complicated relationship with food. We're dealing with severe health conditions that actually have some of the highest mortality rates of any mental illness. Actually, severe symptoms make college students 11 times more likely to attempt suicide. This is exactly why getting our scientific facts straight on this is absolutely crucial. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the reality of eating disorders. Then we'll break down some really harmful stereotypes. Third, we'll explore the perfect storm of risk factors. After that, we'll diagnose the four main types. And finally, we'll cover the path to recovery. Section 1. The reality of eating disorders. So, what exactly is an eating disorder? Well, the National Institute of Mental Health defines them as serious and sometimes fatal illnesses causing severe disturbances to a person's eating behaviors. Notice those specific words: severe disturbances and preoccupation. People with these illnesses are intensely fixated on food choices and body weight. It's like their brain is hijacked by a distorted body image, and they genuinely believe their core self-worth is entirely tied to their physical size. It is an absolutely all-consuming mental state. And this framework is way more common than people think. Researchers estimate that about 9% of people living in the US will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime. That is a staggering 28.8 million Americans, and that number is actually going up. Plus, it's really important to highlight right away that anorexia nervosa has the second highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses. Only substance use disorder is higher. Section 2. Breaking harmful stereotypes. Okay, for a long time, the assumed stereotype was that eating disorders only affected young, white, straight, affluent women who were visibly underweight. But the scientific reality? It's completely different. These disorders can and do affect absolutely anyone. It doesn't matter your background, your current body size, your gender, sexuality, race, or age. When we cling to that old, false stereotype, it's incredibly dangerous. It leaves marginalized groups and people in larger bodies completely under the radar, undiagnosed and untreated. The stereotype literally becomes a wall, blocking them from life-saving medical care. Section 3. The perfect storm of risk factors. There isn't just one single thing that causes an eating disorder. It's multifactorial. First, you've got biological factors, things like genetics, a history of being in a negative energy balance, or even having type 1 diabetes. Then you layer on psychological factors like severe perfectionism, anxiety, or behavioral inflexibility, which is kind of like feeling like a train stuck on a single track, believing there's only one rigidly correct way to do things. And finally, the social factors are what really ignite this. We're talking weight stigma, bullying, the shock of acculturation, or even intergenerational trauma. Basically, when genetic kindling meets psychological and social sparks, the risk skyrockets into the perfect storm. We also absolutely have to talk about diet culture. The data here is alarming. One study found that 14-year-old girls who were simply told they were too fat were significantly more likely to develop unhealthy weight control behaviors by age 19, and that was regardless of their actual BMI. Another 3-year study showed teenagers who dieted were 5 times more likely to develop an eating disorder, and severe dieters, 18 times more likely. No wonder the American Academy of Pediatrics issued such a strong recommendation. They explicitly discourage dieting in kids, pushing families to focus on sustainable, healthy habits instead of just trying to change a number on the scale. Section 4. Diagnosing the 4 main types. Let's start with anorexia nervosa. This involves severe restriction of food amounts and types driven by an intense fear of gaining weight and a totally distorted body image. The physical toll here is just devastating. We're talking extreme nutrient inadequacy, osteoporosis, muscle wasting, incredibly low blood pressure, and eventually heart and brain damage that leads to organ failure. And tying back to what we said earlier about stereotypes, yes, some patients are visibly underweight, but anorexia absolutely happens to people in larger bodies too, who tragically often slip through the cracks of the medical system just because of their size. Next up is bulimia nervosa. This is a severe cycle.
A person eats large amounts of food feeling completely out of control and then tries to compensate by purging, maybe through vomiting or using laxatives and diuretics. Interestingly, unlike the frail stereotype we often see, people dealing with bulimia usually have a normal or overweight BMI. Being underweight is actually pretty rare here. But the health risks are intense. Chronic sore throats, severe tooth erosion from stomach acid, and extreme electrolyte imbalances that can literally trigger a heart attack or stroke. Our third diagnosis is binge eating disorder, or BED. And here's a fact that surprises a lot of folks. This is actually the most common eating disorder in the US, affecting an estimated 2.6% of people in their lifetime. Similar to bulimia, patients experience that profound loss of control and extreme overeating, but the key difference is there's no purging or fasting afterward. BED is often seen in individuals with larger bodies, and the onset is usually a bit later, around age 23. It's heavily linked to a history of restrictive dieting and carries major health risks related to weight stigma, like cardiovascular disease, along with intense feelings of guilt and depression. Finally, let's talk about orthorexia. Now, this is a newer clinical classification, and researchers are identifying it as a dangerous, disordered eating behavior that might be linked to obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's essentially an obsession with clean or healthy eating. Obviously, caring about nutrition is a good thing, but orthorexia is the pendulum swinging way, way too far. It becomes a rigid, extreme fixation. People might cut out entire food groups or panic if safe foods aren't around. The obsession gets so intense that it not only jeopardizes their physical health, but completely ruins their social life, because just going out for a normal meal with friends becomes practically impossible. Pulling this all together into one clinical picture is vital. Comparing them, we see anorexia is about restriction. Bulimia is the binge-purge cycle. BED is binging without the purge, and orthorexia is an intense obsession with food quality over quantity. And just look at how much the BMI presentation varies across these disorders. It is absolute proof that you cannot diagnose an eating disorder just by looking at someone's size. Each condition is distinct, severe, and requires immediate attention. Section 5, the path to recovery. Okay, here is the most important, hopeful takeaway from all the clinical literature. With the right diagnosis and treatment, people absolutely can and do recover completely from eating disorders. But because the causes are a perfect storm, the treatment has to be a full, multifaceted team effort. You need psychotherapy to handle the mental and psychological side. You need medical care to monitor physical health. You need a registered dietitian to help rebuild a safe relationship with food. And often you need medications like antidepressants to help stabilize underlying mood issues. It is incredibly hard work for sure, but the science proves that full recovery is entirely possible. And that wraps up today's explainer. We've gone through the data. We know about that heartbreaking 52-minute statistic, we've busted those old stereotypes, and we've unpacked the real clinical science. But knowing this stuff isn't enough. We have to act on it. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to consider in your own life. Knowing that weight stigma and diet culture are such massive triggers, how can we change our everyday conversations about food, bodies, and weight to prevent the next eating disorder? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep asking